Okay, well, let's just jump in. I think just to slightly row back a little bit, about the representation, and actually there are more mayors named Andy than women, female mayors. So I bring a whole different lived experience to the role. And as somebody that has at university, I was the survivor of sexual violence. He was sent to prison and he got justice. So that has informed my lived experience, that has enabled me to bring that lived experience into my role. So of course, there's lots more going on than just safety of women and girls, but being able to be the Mayor and the Police and Crime Commissioner to say right from the outset, I am going to put the safety of women and girls at the heart of absolutely everything we do. Then to be able to work with somebody like Yvette is just an incredible opportunity, because there's no sort of language barrier, that we really understand what needs to be done. And being able to also invite Alison Lowe to be my deputy mayor, this is a team sport. And I think for so many leaders, sometimes it feels like it's an individualistic opportunity, but I really believe, and I wonder whether it is about gender, but I believe it is about the team delivering with all the different lived experiences. And so working with Alison, Fatima Khan-Shan, who you will hear from later, my inclusivity champion, together, collectively, we are then able to work really closely with Yvette and her team. Alison has been working with you as well on the charging commission to be able to say this has got to be a priority. So in West Yorkshire, we are the first region to have a women's safety unit, which was a recommendation from Dame Louise Casey after she did all that work at the Met, and feeling bold enough to be able to do that, because I know that I've got Yvette's support, because she knows how important it is to, as you say, 51% of the population. So it helps we're friends. So we obviously being in Parliament together, and obviously local relationships as well, because Yvette is in the region, so that also helps. But I think that shorthand of an experience is just really helpful. And I know Yvette shares the same burning urgency to make our country safer for women.
Yeah, and I think Tracy's right, and it is amazing. The work that Tracy is doing is now leading the way for right across the country. And what Tracy and Alison have been doing is setting up the first women's safety units. So it's within the West Yorkshire policing approach to actually have a serious focus around women's safety. The reason I think it follows up from what Tracy was saying is that this is part of why it matters to have more women's voices in politics, in Parliament, as mayors, as police and crime commissioners, as councillors. It really, really matters, because somebody who was very influential for me and probably for Tracy as well was Harriet Harman. But when Harriet was first elected in the 1980s, she would talk about one of the first things she did when she spoke in Parliament, and she stood up at Prime Minister's questions and asked about childcare. And it was like this whole thing goes around, the whole of Parliament, which is predominantly men at that time. It's like, why is somebody raising childcare at Prime Minister's questions? And yet what we know now is childcare is part of it. It's a fundamental part of our economic infrastructure. Actually, it matters for dads as well as for mums, but it was women's voices that were needed to say, look, childcare needs to be a central issue. We saw it too when, under the last Labour government, when we had brought in tax credits, and the proposal from the Treasury was that tax credits should be paid to the main earner in the household, and that's how they should be paid. And actually what happened was a group of Labour women MPs said, well, hang on, you need to pay that money to the main carer in the household, because otherwise, if you've got inequality within the household, if you've got predominantly the mum at that time staying at home with the kids, they're ending up actually being squeezed, and that's where you need the tax credit to be paid for. And that was, again, it mattered having women's voices. And that's why I think the work that Tracy's doing now with women's safety, so Keir Starmer said he wanted to set out a crime mission, which would be what the next Labour government would focus on in terms of a crime mission. Because for me, as Shadow Home Secretary, and Jess Phillips was in my Shadow Home Affairs team at the time. We're talking to Tracy, to Alison, to other police and crime commissioners, and we figured, you know what, we want to make women's safety at the heart of this mission. So we've set as part of that is a mission to halve violence against women and girls over the next 10 years. We know that is hard, and that is something that has to involve everyone. But again, it was an example of, it was something we felt really strongly about. And I think actually in Leeds, it's a really important issue as well, because the first women's safety marches happened here.
Yeah, Reclaim the Night.
It was nearly 50 years ago now, at the time of the Yorkshire Ripper, when women were being told to stay home and not to go out at night. Actually, instead of saying, do you know what, no, what we've got to do is make the streets safe. And yet we're still having so many of the same conversations. And we shouldn't be doing that. And that's why I think Tracy's work around Ask for Angela, around safety on the streets and so on is so important. But it does mean you've got to have women's voices involved.
And I think Rachel as well, with her approach about the gender pay gap, you know, as running our organisation, that's a really big focus for me. And that's why launching the Fair Work Charter, where we're looking at the real living wage as a priority, obviously getting more women in low-income jobs. The real living wage will make a difference, but also SMEs that are potentially on the journey to ensuring that they have a really small gender pay gap. That'll also get you in the gang. So, you know, being able to say that the economy is also where we should be putting our attentions, and things even like parks, where we have been able to commission research from Leeds University about who designs parks, and that we're always the afterthoughts. And so, to Yvette's point about being safe at night and going out, actually, you know, our worlds have been shrinking as boys' worlds, as they get older, have been opening up. And so we can do, much more. Our interventions are just from our lived experience. And that's why I think Rachel leading on that gender pay gap is great. However, sadly, Mary Paley Marshall, who is from the 1800s, also led on it. So we have got a long way to go, and it will be a fight. But I think, Rachel is very focused on that.
But with more women with seats at the table, then hopefully things will accelerate. I think that's
exactly that.
Yeah. And you mentioned obviously working together and working with different stakeholders on the safety. I'll ask you to expand on who else you have involved with the safety campaign as well. But with regards to working with others, and you mentioned Harriet Harman, she mentioned at a recent event to us how when she began in Parliament, cross-party working was not really the done thing, whereas now it seems like I'm quite new at 50/50, but from my working with the women MPs, it seems that that's actually quite common now and really sort of productive. And can you comment a little bit, one, about who else is involved in some of the policies that you both have been working on? Because obviously there are people here who want to get involved in civic activity maybe in a different way. And then talk about cross-party working as well. That would be great.
Sure. So the safety of women and girls work, the consultation was the widest consultation we have ever undertaken. So that was families, students, Gypsy Roma travellers, sex workers. We wanted all of the voices to be heard. But also what was really helpful was bringing together the women's organisations who were saying for the first time in years they felt seen. It's been far too long that they've been on the peripheries trying to just get, funding, commissioning and so on. But now we have a cohesive approach. We are all in lockstep and in partnership. But also the police play a really important role in this. And I really applaud West Yorkshire Police because they're very innovative. We've had our first ever conviction using smart water, which is DNA water, which when somebody breaks an exclusion order, when it's a victim of domestic violence or whatever, it's always he said, she said. Sadly, it's often the female is the victim and the male is the perpetrator. But the smart water spray, the DNA spray stays on your clothes and your skin for 3 months. So you have evidence that they broke that order. So working with the police and having that innovation was amazing, but also working with victim support on the stalking advocacy service. We know that stalking is the early start of femicide, and stalking is often part of the beginning of what ends up with a murder of a woman. If we can intervene in stalking, we could potentially save lives. We've had, since last October, 1,200 referrals and working directly with 440 women. I mean, goodness me, the statistics alone would tell you that at least one woman, her destiny is going to be changed through that stalking work that we're doing. So we're working with charities, with voluntary sector, with the Violence Reduction Partnership, which is the police and crime team, and West Yorkshire Police. But this is a team, it's a team sport. We all have to collectively work together if this revolution is going to work in West Yorkshire. And just to the cross-party point, I've never done a job that's more cross-party than being a mayor. And being the chair of the UK mayors, the 10 mayors, and being able to be, I was nominated by Andy Street to be chair in the West Midlands, and we have an independent. We are all collectively mayors who are working with the same challenges, the same ambitions for our regions. And I actually, frankly, after the Convention of the North, at the Armories a couple of weeks ago, seeing the North come together, cross-party, with the same 4 missions that collectively we can deliver, when 90% of the North is going to be devolved and have mayors and other devolved powers. I mean, goodness me, that is quite powerful, being able to work together. And I think the New Statesman called it the quiet revolution, because it is the revolution that it's not about party politics, it's about place as a mayor, over and above. Of course, I'm a loyal Labour mayor, but place is as important almost as party.
And then just picking up, I guess, on both the points Tracy made on stalking and on the cross-party thing, was it was either 2011, 2012. Actually, we didn't have a clear law on stalking. And I drew up an amendment to the legislation that was going through Parliament at the time on stalking. We didn't get agreement on it in the Commons at the time, but then Jan Royal, who was a Labour peer in the House of Lords, then put the same proposal in the House of Lords, built some cross-party support as well in the House of Lords. We got it through the House of Lords, and then Theresa May was the Home Secretary at the time. We put pressure on, we raised it with her, and ultimately the government agreed, actually, yes, we should change the law on stalking. So the Violence Against Women and Girls has been, and something similar happened actually about the Domestic Abuse Commissioner, which again had been a proposal that I'd worked on in opposition, but actually then the Conservative government took up and implemented. And it's one of those issues where sometimes there are things you think, do you know what, we need this for our manifesto, and it all becomes part of the election. But actually, the Violence Against Women and Girls is an area where we have just been pushing for as much progress as possible, as fast as possible, whenever, in order to try and do as much as possible to save women's lives, ultimately. But as another example, just in terms of people to work with, the other thing that we've done, and I know that Tracy has done quite a lot of as well, is to talk to victims and survivors and their families. And I would pay tribute, one of the things we're working on at the moment, to an incredible woman called Noor Norris. And Noor's niece was Raneem Uda, and her sister Kaula was Raneem's mother. And it was the story you may have seen was reported in the West Midlands. And Raneem was a victim of domestic abuse. She had asked repeatedly for help from the police. She'd been to the police many times, but the perpetrator was not arrested and charged. There were no protection orders taken out. And eventually she felt under pressure to go to get a protection order, to get a non-molestation order herself, because otherwise she was under pressure from social services in terms of her child, where actually the police should have been taking action to protect her. She got a non-molestation order, but of course that can also be a point of great risk for in a domestic abuse case. And then she ended up after that, immediately after that, with the perpetrator pursuing her again, she called 999 4 times on the night that she was killed, and no one came. And that's not good enough. That is not good enough. And that is so badly letting women down. And her mother, Cowler, was also killed that same night as well when she tried to help her daughter. And that is, Noor has been campaigning for her niece and for her sister and for the system to change so other women don't have to go through that. And she has been talking to us. She's been talking to people, to her MP, to people in Parliament. We've done a lot of work with Noor, and we've drawn up a proposal for Raneem's law that we would bring in that would put domestic abuse specialists in every 999 control centre. So never again can you have a situation where the call comes in to the 999 control room and nobody takes it seriously enough. To make sure that you overhaul the protection orders so that the police have to take action to see if they need to bring in a protection order themselves fast, not wait and leave someone to have to go and get a protection order themselves. And also, and here's one of the most shocking things, that non-molestation order that Raneem had taken out wasn't even on the police system. So when it was breached, when her perpetrator went after her, when it was breached, they didn't know. And to make sure, as part of Raneem's law, that is changed so that that system is automatically, immediately flagged with the police, and they immediately know this is a priority case that they have to be there for and that they have to respond to. And that is a long way to tell a story, but just feels so important as a story to tell. And it is also, it's a story of how, actually for Noor, she's not in elected politics. Actually, she would be amazing if she was, but she's not in elected politics, but she's found another way to campaign and to keep being a voice for her niece and for her sister. And it's another way of just showing there are so many different ways that you can change things. And I hope we'll be able to get Raneem's law into place. But if we do, it will be because of Noor, and it will be because of her campaigning and her speaking out for her family as well.
That's incredible leadership, isn't it? And do you remember the case of the overkill? It's a young woman in Leeds whose partner, ex, followed her back to their flat. They'd split up, and because he used a kitchen knife, his sentence was less than had he had a knife in the street. And I know that 2 of her family members, both women, have been campaigning like crazy to get a change in that law, and I know you've been working with them. But that is leadership, isn't it? I mean, when we're all talking about ask her to stand, aren't we? But that is leadership, and whether you're elected or not, you're still being an inspiration to others about the massive injustice and awfulness, but something coming out of that hopefully will help others. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's a really powerful example, and it shows, I think, to our audience here and at home that, you know, domestic violence is incredibly prevalent, and the personal is political, and you know, these are things that affect all of our lives, whether it is domestic violence. I'm sure we all know people who have been subjected to, if not domestic violence, and, you know, street harassment. And the policies that Tracy and Yvette are talking about, they affect our everyday lives. And I think there is a bit of a disconnect between the public and politicians, and them not quite understanding that this is it. This is what they are doing. And with more women in politics, there will be more of this type of change.
I think if I could just jump in on that point, I think it's also something you said about male allies, that it isn't always just about domestic violence. It's the draining nature of misogyny, that wherever you go, whatever you're doing, you are still open to harassment, and 86% of women have experienced sexual harassment in public. We've funded a film called Just Don't, which underneath in the comments though, it's so tragic to read them, because there are women saying, well, 86% is wrong. That statistic is wrong. It's 100% because that is my lived experience. So we need male allies to be part of they are part of the solution. We love men, you know, we live and work with them. It is not just our fight to have to deal with.
And also what's good for women is good for men.
Well, of course, that's
because
absolutely right.
You know, there is that is a societal change where, you know, men have sisters, mothers, daughters, you know, this affects everybody. It's a chain reaction, as well as it just being a good thing to do to be a male ally. It will positively affect your life as well. And you really nicely led on to the Ask Her to Stand hashtag that we have, the campaign that we have. So if you wouldn't mind talking briefly about how you both got into politics, and also Yvette, you told me before a really nice anecdote that I'd really like you to relay to the audience, and then an encouragement to the women here and at home about not only signing up to Stand, which you can do on the 50/50 website, but also looking around your community at people like Noor and seeing who is doing the work already, who is already showing that leadership, who is already an activist, and maybe encouraging that person to ask her to stand. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your journeys and then a little bit about why the women here and at home should potentially think about it themselves.
Could I just ask who is thinking or is already a candidate or standing?
Hands high, please.
Nice and confident. Great stuff. Good, good. So there's a few of you. Well, yeah, congratulations to you for having the confidence. And who is thinking about it? Maybe one day. Yeah, good, good.
Nice.
So I never thought about being in politics, having been an actor and a writer, and but being a staunch Labour activist, I used my celebrity, which is when you're on the telly. It's always helpful if you can go to a door knocking session for a council candidate, because at least then you get the local newspaper. And that's how I met Jo Cox. We went out door knocking and then we ran a campaign to save Batley Library. But while we were door knocking, she said, Tracy, you should think about a career in politics. You really are good on the doors. I then tried Labour Women's Network, which was hell. I did it and I just thought, my God, this is so difficult. And when you have to watch yourself back on media, it's like, I'm no good at this. It's not for me. And then we know what happened then, the tragic murder of Jo. And just that moment in time where I just understood when I said, what can I do to her friends? And one of them said, do you want to be an MP? And it just fell into place that we needed somebody that was from Birstall, from Batley, me, that knew Jo and we were friends, but also somebody that came from outside politics, actually, because somebody who was yearning to be a politician actually wouldn't feel right. And also, I would say that being an actor, one of the key talents from the very best actors, I don't put myself in this bracket, is empathy. And I think somebody that could cope with, wherever you went, people would burst into tears when they saw you. And it was a really difficult political lesson. And, you know, I was very much out of my depth, but then I got to understand the job. And I would say, even if you think you can't do it, you learn on the job. And there's so many guys who just put their hand up who are definitely not good for the job, but they learn on the job and eventually they become good. So then being a member of parliament is a huge privilege. I felt I made an impact, and for 5 years I represented Batley and Spen, 4 of which I was on the shadow front bench. However, I also felt I couldn't actually change the lives of the people who I represented, because it's really difficult in opposition. I could see so much poverty, so much anguish, so much desperation, so much isolation. Transport wasn't working, housing wasn't fit for purpose. And then we were talking about devolution. And when we're talking about male allies, the first person I said, do you know what, actually, I think I have a lot of strengths that would potentially be good to be, for mayor, especially when all the other mayors were male. And I'd been looking around for a woman to support and realised, actually, I've got to walk the walk myself. And one of the first people in the tea room in the House of Parliament, I floated it by, was Alex Sobel, MP. And he immediately said, you'd be brilliant. Right, what do I need to do? I'm going to get you some team. We're going to get a bit of resource. And I was carried away with the support that I got from Alex. And that's what I would say to all of you. It's not just women dropping the ladder, but there are also men out there that can help elevate you to the position that you should be in. So it was a circuitous route into politics, but leadership comes in many forms. So being the equity dep as an actor, standing up for others. I remember fighting for pensions for writers on Hollyoaks. And all of those writers will now be sat on their boats drinking pina coladas, thanks to me. But I was then fired once I'd got that through, and there was only me doing it. And I was like, we're not going to renew the contract. So I'm sure my writing maybe fell off a cliff because I was so distracted with fighting for pensions, and they had every right to fire me. I don't know if the two are connected. But it is interesting, when you think back into your past, did you fight to get a zebra outside your kids' school? Did you gather women together about, better lighting outside your railway station? These feel small things, but this is leadership. If you're gathering people together in a common purpose, that is leadership, and that should go on your CV.
Yeah.
You're a star, thank you.
I would say, I suppose, I stood for Parliament because I was encouraged to do so by two other women, and I would not have thought about having a go. And it was Ruth Kelly and Lorna Fitzsimons who had been selected as Labour candidates in 1997, just in the run-up to 1997. And look, my granddad was a miner, my dad was a trade union official, and I'd done different jobs, and I'd worked for John Smith for the Labour Party, so I desperately wanted us to get a Labour government elected. I desperately wanted, especially when you saw, very much the damage, particularly that the Thatcher government had done to communities right across the country, particularly coalfield communities right across the country. So many reasons to want to get a Labour government elected, but I hadn't thought that I should have a go. And they didn't say stand, actually. They didn't say be an MP. What they said was have a go. It was just have a go. It was just have a go. And so somehow when you think like it's just have a go, actually it's instead of just thinking about where you might end up and all the reasons why that might go wrong and all the reasons why you maybe can't do that and so on, because actually there's an awful lot of people who don't think like that. Instead of thinking like that, just think, well, have a go. Just, have a go. And it was that encouragement that meant I had a go. And that, I think it's that encouragement, and Tracy's right, that sort of have a go encouragement is, do just say it to other people in different situations. Say it to other people. Those encouraging words, have a go, can come from men, they can come from women. I will give a shout out to my junior school headmaster, who, when he arrived at the school, all the boys had great sports teams, and they were, loads of sports teams and coaches and so on, and there was no sport for the girls, and he was really into sport. So he got a book on netball, and he got a book on rounders, and he learned how to do the sport, and then he coached the girls' teams, set up the girls' teams, and his whole thing was, have a go. Have a go. And we ended up in that school that everybody thought girls' sport was more important than boys' sport because, of course, the headmaster was taking the girls' sport, so that was the real, confidence. And it made a massive difference in terms of that sense of confidence. So have a go. And then my final thought on this have a go, and I will really just say to you, just have a go at something. And it may not be that you want to be a councillor, it may not be, but you may want to have some other campaign or something else that you want to do, or encourage someone else who you think would be really great to get involved and to do things, because you've got to have all of those different voices being involved. And we had, my final thought is this amazing woman called Winnie McLaughlin. And when I was first elected in 1997, Winnie was in her 80s by that time. And she was a councillor in Glasshoughton. She was a Wakefield district councillor for Castleford and Glasshoughton. And Winnie had actually been a councillor. She was first elected in the 1960s to Castleford Council. And I asked her, I said, what, you know, when she first became a councillor, there were no women councillors in the coalfields. She would have been one of the very few women councillors to be elected and then be elected onto Wakefield Council when it was first set up in the 70s. I said, how come you stood? And she said, it was because she went to a meeting in Pontefract and the speaker was Margaret Bonfield. So the first ever woman cabinet minister, first ever Labour woman cabinet minister in the 1945 Labour government, had been travelling around the country doing events, and she'd spoken at this event in Pontefract that Winnie had gone along to. And Winnie said, I think she just said at the end of this, so come on, to all the women in the room, you should stand, you should have a go. And so Winnie remembered that, and that is why she had a go. And that is why I would say, you know, that thing that is that Sheryl Sandberg thing that always says is lean in.
Lean in.
Lean out and just encourage, put a hand out to somebody else and encourage them to just have a go.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much. And that is exactly, it really nicely underlines exactly why we keep banging this drum, exactly why we're doing events like this. We want to just carry on, ask, and ask again. A final question for you is women leaders that inspire you. I know that I have your book, She Speaks. So if you could speak a little bit about the women that have inspired you, that would be wonderful.
Well, it's a northern, you know, obviously looking to northern women, because looking around to other mayors, that there's, you know, like, where are they? So hopefully I can inspire other women to become mayors, and let's hope Kim McGuinness gets over the line and becomes the mayor for the North East. So Barbara Castle, Betty Boothroyd, you know, I was from Batley, and, you know, Betty Boothroyd from Dewsbury. You know, we were both probably in Dewsbury Market at some point or another. But also, you know, Yvette is a fantastic inspiration. Harriet Harman, Angie Rayner. Rachel is going to be the first ever, hopefully the first ever female chancellor, and she's a Leeds MP. And, you know, actually it could be a golden age for women in politics, I think. So just get on board, guys, because come on, it's going to be amazing.
So I would add to, obviously we've got Alice Bacon, who grew up in Normanton, who became a Leeds MP. You've got Barbara Castle, actually grew up for a bit in Pontefract as well. But I would just also add is a woman called Joan O'Connell. And I only discovered about her when I was doing some research to pull together the book I did for women's speeches, because I thought I actually like reading speeches, and, you know, sort of as part of the job, I actually like reading the way people try and put forward an argument and try and persuade people. But all the books are speeches, like 95% of the speeches in them are men. And you think, hang on, there's an awful lot of women who were speaking as well, but those voices are not getting heard. So we were looking, doing the research, came across this woman called Joan O'Connell. And she was Irish, she was a trade unionist, and you may have come across part of her story if you have watched the film Made in Dagenham. Now, obviously, Made in Dagenham was about the Dagenham women going on strike, but there was a particular speech in it at the TUC conference that in the film is made by Rita in Made in Dagenham. In practice, that speech was actually made by an Irish trade unionist, Joan O'Connell. But she was speaking about what was happening in Dagenham, and she was putting forward a motion at the TUC conference for equal pay for women. And she has a whole thing in it about how, you know, if Barbara Castle can get equal pay in Parliament, why can't we have equal pay for women in every single job in the country? She had arguments about, you know, everybody keeps saying we can have it sometime in the future. And she uses this phrase, she says, I want more than the promise of a dream. And it was all her speech, and most people haven't heard of her. But actually that speech meant that the TUC overturned the recommendation of the General Council, which was to go against equal pay, and they passed the motion for equal pay and to campaign for equal pay. And 12 months later, Barbara Castle brought in the Equal Pay Act, which has changed the lives of huge numbers of women right across the country ever since. Most people have never heard of Joan O'Connell, but that comes back to what I mean about Nor Norris or Joan O'Connell or any single woman in this room. The number of things you could be campaigning for, it's not just about the people who might be sitting up on the panel or the people that you see in Parliament. It's those changes that you can make that can transform women's lives, can transform communities' lives, and every single bit of it is really, really powerful.
Wow.
Can I just have another one?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry to your applause, crash into your applause. Jenny Lee. Who has been slightly overshadowed by Nye Bevan, but as the woman that created the Open University, how many women have used the Open University to empower themselves, to have the confidence to then, is it yourself? You see, I didn't know that. To be able to then feel that they've got, the resources to be able to step up.
Yeah.
What was your course in?
Fundraising. Fundraising diploma passed with merit. Thank you.
Give us a quiz.
Well, fundraising is a good subject to get onto because we are a tiny charity and we are always looking for donors. And you can go on and become a friend of 50/50, which helps support our work. But if you are not inspired from those speeches and those anecdotes and those examples of policy to sign up to stand, then I don't know what's going to do it. We are going to hear from more women's voices now, I believe, and we're going to move on to the panel discussion. So it's going to be a bit of musical chairs for a moment. So you can take that opportunity to get your phones out, go onto the 50/50 Parliament website, sign up to stand. There's a clickable sign up to stand on there, or send it to a friend and ask her to stand right now, or become a friend of 50/50 whilst we manoeuvre around.